Hi, friends. Uh, as you're probably aware, this is my wife, Kathy, and we are here to talk to our mid-single friends about when to introduce the kids or invite uh, someone you're dating to meet your kids. And this is something we both have experience with. We both dated while we were uh, still had kids at home.
As we talk about the subject, I'm going to open the blinds and see if we can get a little more light in here.
Okay.
Okay.
So while Kathy does that, I want to sort of set the table for this subject and say there's a question of whether, first of all, do you introduce your kids early on or later, when you're more serious? And there are various ideas. I mean, there's probably as many different ideas about this as there are singles. Um, we both chose to do it earlier, and we can talk about that. Um, I made a Facebook post earlier today, which some of you may have seen, uh, with a former dating partner 8 years ago, and it blew my mind that that had been 8 years. My oldest son at that time was 18, and he was actually the one who made the post that I shared that he tagged me in. And he and my younger son were actually on that date with us. My younger son at the time would have been 14. And so uh, and my kids got to know that particular partner. Her name was Julie, and she had three daughters, and our two families got to know each other well. And it was a positive relationship for everyone around. We're still all Facebook friends. My son, my older son, and I went to Julie's middle daughter's wedding, traveled to get there, um, and we had a very positive relationship. Now, we didn't end up getting married. And
well, to each other.
Yeah, to each other.
But you're each married now.
We're each married to other people, and I'm happy for her that she's happy. I only want good things for her and for the best number of other dating partners I may have had. So um, I felt like that is one example of a relationship between our two families where really we didn't only date each other, we dated each other's kids. Um, and and in many cases it was that way, and certainly with Kathy it was like that. I mean, I knew her kids for 2 years before we got married, and when I finally moved in, we already loved each other and we already knew each other pretty well. And so I found introducing my kids at an early stage and being introduced to Kathy's kids at a relatively early stage was a positive experience. Now, I know some people think, well, it's for young kids, if you got too many people coming in and out of their lives, that's confusing.
I'm sure sometimes it depends on the personality of the kids and, of course, the personality of the dating partners. But I've asked my kids, because they were young, Jeff had an open discussion with his about whether they wanted to be involved, and they said yes. But they were older at the time. My kids were fairly young, and so I didn't have that discussion. I just did it. But I have asked them since if that's how they liked it, and they said yes.
Yeah, and my kids did make that choice, and I honored it because I felt that, as teenagers, they were old enough to know what they wanted, and they were old enough to understand that I wasn't going to marry necessarily everybody that I dated. So, and I tended, when I had some level of control over it, I tried to maintain happy, positive relationships with former dating partners. It doesn't always happen. The other person gets upset.
And it's interesting, Jeff and I had a similar philosophy. We both like to, end things well, if, when things did end in any relationship. And like he said, it doesn't always work, but that was always our goal.
Yeah. I think when we talk about how we introduce dating partners, my kids, like I said, wanted me to introduce them fairly early, and I didn't have a real strict policy, but anybody I'd seen maybe 3 times and thought there might be some potential with, I I would plan something often with them and their kids if they were ready to do that. And and it was usually something casual at one of our places. I think the first time, to bring up the woman in the Facebook post today, I think the first time we roasted marshmallows in her backyard. I mean, it was that sort of casual event, and my boys got to know her girls, and hit it off well, and that's the way I typically did introductions.
Would you say I'm dating this person?
Yeah,
Okay.
I would.
And I would actually
knew.
just say, this is one of mommy's friends. Because they were little, and so, I mean, they knew I was dating. I mean, I think they were old enough to understand that, but I just introduced them as friends, and it was no big deal, and it was very casual. And I know that there are reasons people have for introducing kids later, and there's pros and cons to both. But it's interesting that the other day we were watching a show, and during the show, this single mom next door, had been dating this guy for like 6 months. They were getting really serious, and then she decided to introduce her kids. And she kept saying, you don't really have to like him, but it'd be really great if you liked him. And, that put a lot of pressure on the kids, and the kids were all nervous, and she was super nervous, and it was this big
Certainly the
formal
guy would have
thing.
been nervous.
Well, and then, like, when they had the dinner, everybody was tripping up all over their words, and they weren't being themselves because they didn't really know how to act. And so that was the big pro to me, to having kids introduced early on, casually, is that it wasn't a big formal, like, hard thing.
Yeah, if you introduce the kids way late, and there are reasons to do that, and you may choose to go that way, but if you do that, you've got to know the kids are going to be playing catch up, and if you really like this person, you're going to be in a different place with them than your kids are.
Right.
And that's just something.
And that's
you're going
the
to have
con
to
to the other. What would be the pro? The pro to waiting would be keeping your kids, extra safe. I would wait until I knew someone well enough to feel comfortable that they weren't going to do anything bad to my kids or to me, or, things like that. But I never had any problem. Like, I never had anyone be inappropriate with my kids, and maybe I got lucky that way. Maybe that wasn't the right thing, but for us it worked, and they liked it, and I think we had more fun that way. Like Jeff said, we were able to do fun things with our friends, and I think my kids enjoyed having more friends around, because it was just me and my two boys, and having more friends around was more fun.
The second time I met Kathy's kids, I actually babysat them. Now, before
What?
before I
The second time?
The second time, because you went to the hospital for some tests, and so I got there. Yeah, I got to Kathy's home right before they got home from school, and so I was there and picked them up, and then a short time later,
he was basically helping me out,
and
because they were still young enough that they couldn't just get everywhere they needed on their own.
And just to clarify, Kathy's mother and grandmother were living with her at that time, and so they actually were home.
Right. So I had some, built-in precautions there.
Kathy and I knew each other fairly well by that time. I mean, we had seen each other a lot more than the kids had seen me, but I had a great time with the boys that day. I mean, we watched Goosebumps on TV, and
I'm sure they loved it.
Yeah, they loved it. We had a good time, and I took them to the doctor where Kathy was, and we picked her up. And so, both of us were pretty open that way, and our families were pretty open that way. And I personally loved it. I mean, my kids didn't really, for the close to 10 years that I was single, my kids didn't really get that sense of having an intact family, but sometimes I think when they could see me with a dating partner that I liked and that I respected, and we treated each other well, think there was a little taste of that kind of family sort of atmosphere. And I was grateful to be able to give them that, even though there were people that I wasn't ready to marry yet. And, um, all of those relationships with, I think, with my children and the children of people I dated were were by and large very positive. I know this is one of the things that keeps a lot of mid-singles from dating. They're afraid, if I date somebody, what if my kids don't like them, or what if it's a hard transition to to living together. And I've seen it. I've seen it where it's really difficult. The way that I dated and the way Kathy dated, we didn't have a really rough transition. Now, by the time I moved in, and of course we were married, my boys were both raised.
And that, I am sure, would have been more difficult for the kids probably to blend. But had, his kids still been around and we'd been doing family stuff all together, that probably would have made it easier, I think.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, since we've been married, I mean, my older son was my escort at the temple, and my kids have gotten to know Kathy's boys, who live with us half the time now. And I mean, they'll be the ones often that will initiate things and say, "Can we call Errol? That's my oldest son. Can we call him?" And they really look up to him.
Well, and you know how boys trash talk. I mean, they do that on the phone.
Yeah, so even though they're way apart, I mean, 12 years apart in age and all that, they have that sort of brotherly feeling.
Yeah, and I think my boys look up to them. Like, they like to, it's they see, them having grown, and I think that's good for them, because they know that one day that's where they'll be, is out on their own, possibly married, in their careers, going to school.
Yeah, Errol, my oldest, is a returned missionary, and in fact, we weren't dating yet for the second time when Errol got home from his mission and reported his mission and sacrament meeting. But I invited Kathy to come down and meet him, because all the time that we were dating before, I talked about him.
Came.
And the boys came.
That was good.
And so they got to see him report his mission before we ever got back together and got married.
No. Oh, were you done?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that was a good example for them, and they've always looked up to him a little bit. And I think part of it is that.
I think so, for sure. That, and they have some, things in common. They talk about, movies and.
Right. Forrest likes to go around making little movies.
Then Tucker likes to talk Errol into, what he wants him to watch and
right
stuff. Anyway, but we talked about the fact that sometimes you might want to wait until you're in an exclusive relationship, so you're only introducing your kids to one person at a time. I personally didn't do that. I wanted it to be more casual than that. I always introduced them as friends. But another way would be to wait until you're exclusive and with one person. The only thing with that, though, is that you have to be more open if that relationship doesn't work out. It can be a little harder on the kids, I think, because, then they have this one person in their lives that, might disappear all of a sudden.
Yeah, that can be.
And because
in some situations that can be hard. I never had that experience. But
yeah, I didn't have that either, because I didn't wait to introduce them until I was exclusive, because I really hardly ever got exclusive with anyone, because I was just really not in committed mode during the few years of my mid-singles, because I was really wanting to make sure that I waited until I felt like it really would probably lead to marriage quickly.
She is exclusive now, though, guys. No, keep your hands off.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, the thing is, once I commit, I'm totally loyal, and so I reserved that, for when I was really, really ready. And so sometimes, I might stop seeing a person and my kids wouldn't even know, and maybe a few weeks later they'll be like, "Oh, what about this guy?" And, I'd usually just, if they brought it up, then I'd, just say, "Oh, well, we're not going to hang out with him anymore," or at least for now, or whatever. And they usually were cool about it.
I will say there's one of Kathy's old boyfriends that uh, became a friend of mine as well. And he actually was here less than 2 weeks ago, I think. And uh, one of Kathy's kids was here that night. He was here because we decided
Do a double date.
do a double date with him, and he actually went out with my cousin, non-serious at at the time, but
Jeff likes to play matchmaker actually, so
but
it
anyway.
was just fun to catch up. And
And
one
her
of my
son,
kids,
hadn't seen him for a while, but
yeah.
was comfortable with him because he'd been around before. And
Well, and I think it reminded them like, oh, I like that guy, like they kind of forget, I think, through the years, and then if they see one of them again, they're like, oh, I forget how much I like hanging out with him.
There's another old friend of Kathy's that they know who's been around here from time to time. He's a good friend of mine as well. Came to my bachelor party. I've been his attorney, and and he's been around here 3 or 4 times since we've been married. And so I
We
think
have another friend too that just he comes a lot, and actually he likes to surprise them with gifts for holidays and stuff, which is really sweet. And so of course they love him.
right.
So yeah, we have fun with each other's friends, and our kids have fun with our friends, and we have fun with our kids and our friends, and it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, we have boundaries like every other
Obviously.
couple when it comes to our relationship and protecting our relationship. But I've never told my kids ever that if I ended a relationship with someone that they had to cut off contact.
I haven't.
I've never done that.
I haven't either, although that's not like really a thing with how young they are.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bigger issue with older kids, and I think that's a good policy, honestly. If you're going to introduce your kids to someone, then they have their own relationship with them, and I think that anyone who's good for the kids, even if maybe we're not still in a relationship, then it's good for the kids.
Yeah, we my kids maintain friendships with some of my old dating partners on Facebook, as well as their kids in some cases, and I'm good with it. And in fact, I maintain relationships with some of the children of people I dated, as well as some of those people. And Kathy's aware of them. We're very open about all of that.
That's our biggest policy, is that we just talk to each other about whenever we've had contact with someone we formerly dated. I mean, we're really open with each other about it, and we try to be friends with each other's friends. So
yep, and that
works for us.
It's it can be a complicated issue when you're mid-singles and you got kids, but by and large, I don't believe it has to be the huge drama that it's made out to be. And if you're not dating because you're afraid that it's going to be bad for your kids, I don't think it has to turn out like that.
I think kids are a lot more open to however open you are, really. And so the more you let them know you're going to live your life and you're going to be dating, and and introduce them when you feel safe around that person, then they really, at least do you think it's just our kids, or do you think most kids are like that?
I mean, most of the kids of people that I dated who introduced them, I had great fun with. And so
they were always pretty open.
And they were always pretty open and nice. And I think kids are like that. I think sometimes we get the hang up about it as parents, and we're so guilty because, we've broken our kids' homes up. Yeah, we feel so guilty because we've broken our kids' homes up.
Doesn't mean we are guilty, just because we feel guilty.
But I think Kathy's fond of saying that love is additive. And I know there are people I dated who love my children, and I feel that was a blessing. And so
it adds to their circle of people that care about them.
Yeah. And so if that is something stopping you from dating, I mean, certainly I want to leave, toward the end of this video, a challenge that you think this through. Think through the various arguments on both sides of the issue. And
you might find even somewhere in between. We introduced ours fairly on. There's people who introduce them fairly late, and when it's getting really serious, and it just can't be helped because it's almost marriage time, and then there's all the in between. So there's really sky's the limit as far as, on this topic, when to introduce your kids and how.
And my advice is to come up with a well thought out policy of your own that feels right to you, and kind of stick to that and make sure that it's something you've thought out, and that you feel will be in the best interest of your kids. One other little tip that I would give you, and I would give this advice to almost anyone dating, regardless of whether their child is a brand new baby or 25 years old. um, I told my sons very early on, um, I think it's time for me to start dating again. And I said, um, I'm going to choose who I date and who I marry. Now, I hope that whoever I choose to date, and especially who I choose to marry, that you'll like them. And I'm willing to listen to whatever advice or counsel you might give me and take it seriously, but I will make my own decision for my own purposes. And I told them, you're going to come to a point in your lives when you're going to choose who you marry. And I hope you'll listen to my counsel and advice and take it into consideration. But ultimately, you're going to decide who you marry.
And it's my understanding that they liked that. They
They
understood it because he came at it from their own perspective and their own relationships and how that would work. And that was a respectful thing. My kids were young enough, we didn't have that clear of a discussion. But I think I made it clear just through my behavior that I was going to live my life and I was going to date and I was going to have fun. And actually, I learned in the divorce class, that children like it better when they know their parent isn't going to be alone or lonely when they're gone. They want to know you're living your life when they're with their other parent. If you have a custody situation where they go back and forth. They feel more comfortable when you're not just sitting around missing them. When you say that you're missing them, they feel guilty for leaving. They feel pressure. And if they know that you're busy having fun and having friends and living your life, I think it's good for them. Plus, they see that you're a real person and not just their caregiver.
And I experienced that directly with my oldest. From the time he graduated from high school until a year after he got home from his mission, he got home when he was 23. So from the time he graduated from high school until he went on his mission, and then after his mission for another year, he lived with me. And I know that was something on his mind. He moved with me to Texas, and then he moved with me back to Utah. And I think it made it more possible for him to move on and live his life, to get married himself, knowing that he wasn't going to leave me alone, that I had my partner. And interesting, kind of fun coincidence, we got married May 11th, 2018, which was the 1-year anniversary of him getting home from his mission. He then married his sweetheart on May 11th, 2019. 1 year to the day after we got married.
Yeah, that's fun. It's a super duper anniversary for us.
So yeah, I do believe what Kathy just said is true. I think he would have ultimately moved on, but I think it just made it easier for him to move on when he knew that he wasn't leaving me.
Yeah, I think he's independent. He would have done whatever he's going to do, but I'm sure it is nice that he's settled into his marriage. We're settled into ours. And
we double date whenever they're in town, and it's super fun.
Oh, yeah.
Super fun. So.
I think you've left the challenge. I think we should wrap up.
I think we should wrap up. Anyway, we
so what's the challenge again?
Well, for the first thing, think through your policy, what you're going to do about introducing people you date to your children. Think through all the ideas.
And it doesn't have to be so rule-oriented as a basic idea.
Basic principles. And then secondly, make sure you make it clear to your children that they don't have a vote. They have a voice. They can recommend, they can give you counsel, and you'll listen. But you make the decisions. I've seen kids who think they have a veto that get really tyrannical about it in these decisions. So that's the second piece of advice.
because you're the one that has to be married to your partner, not them. I mean, they do,
Right.
but they do have to deal with the change. And so I think being respectful and appreciating their input. In fact, that's why I introduced my kids early on. I didn't want to end up being really close to and investing a whole bunch of energy and time and love into a relationship that I didn't know would mesh well with my kids.
I guess the, oh, sorry. I guess the third piece of advice is come and like our page, Love in Later Years,
Oh yeah,
here on Facebook.
We do these videos every week, just on a different topic of dating in your mid singles. And we define mid singles as anyone 30 and up. Obviously, there's all sorts of stages of life, but really, once we're past our 20s, we're done with college, we're into our careers, we likely have either been married and divorced, or we've been in significant relationships and had them not work out. And so we have trauma. Sometimes we've got kids, we've got custody, we've got blending families. Like, it just gets more complicated for people after about 30. I mean, and you might consider yourself already a mid-single a little bit about before that. It all depends on your life situation, I think.
And then I guess my final piece of advice, besides what we've just said, is have fun. Dating doesn't have to, I know we hear a lot about, I hate dating. Dating is different at midlife in some ways. It involves kids like we talked about, but it's fun. You get to know great people. You get to have adventures. So be positive and enjoy it. This can be a great time of your life. I know it probably wasn't what you planned on, being single in your 30s or 40s or 50s.
You can make the best of it.
And it can be really fun. And it was for us. And so thanks for joining in. We appreciate you listening and wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.